congressional record offered by Mr. Nogbauer of Texas.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 17, 2011, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nogbauer, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, this discussion we've been having for the last 3 or 4 days is really about what the American people said on November 2nd. They said that these huge deficits are unacceptable. The fact that we're going to run a $1.6 trillion deficit this year, that our debt is almost $14.1 trillion. Projections are, if we continue on this pace, that that will double in the next 10 years. And, Mr. Chairman, the American people said this is unacceptable. And so what are the American people doing in their own lives at home? Well, they're addressing needs versus wants. And what they're saying is there are some things that they need, and then there's something that they want. But what they understand in these tough economic times where we have a number of our American citizens that are unemployed, that a lot of people are having to prioritize how they spend. And maybe there's a fence in the backyard that needs replacing, or maybe the deck in the backyard needs a new boards. But they're postponing those. And so basically this is a very simple amendment. Basically the White House has 2 accounts. One for basically daily maintenance, and that account has $13 million, and this amendment does not address that account. But as they do in Washington, you know, what happens if you want to get more money, you add more accounts and you just rename them. And so there's another account called renovations and upgrades. And so what we're saying is that there is $2 million worth of upgrades that the White House would like to do. It includes things like doing a plumbing survey, something like computer system upgrades. We think that possibly those are items that can wait until our economy gets rolling again, until we could having these record deficits. And so it's just a very simple amendment, Mr. Chairman, is that we just think that the White House can postpone those expenses, things that they would like, but not necessarily need. This will still allow the White House to mow the yard, do the painting, do the maintenance at the White House. But it says these capital expenditures of over $2 million should be postponed for another year or 2 until we get our deficit spending down. And with that, I reserve.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Missouri rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in opposition to this amendment, and I yield.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I yield myself 1.5 minutes. I would like to say that there is an account in our financial services bill for repair and restoration at the White House, and the funding for that is $495,000, or 20% less than the fiscal year 2010 level. And these requested funds would provide for an alternate electric feed, which we understand is because the power there fails. Occasionally, computer system upgrades, a plumbing system survey, to beginning addressing their leaky plumbing. However, the language of Mr. Nogbauer's amendment doesn't just strike funding in the account. This amendment actually states that none of the funds made available by the Act may be used for repair, alteration, or improvement of the executive residence at the White House. And this is really a sweeping prohibition because it prohibits all repairs at the White House. So what happens if a pipe bursts? What happens if there's a hole in the drywall or the plaster? What if there's an electrical fire or a broken window? What if a safety or security issue needs to be addressed? And I dare say that most people, most everybody, even if their belts if they were tightening their belts, they still have to deal with those emergency issues. And at the end of the day, the White House is the most visited residence in the country. It's an office, it's a museum, and it's a home. And regardless of who occupies the White House, the building needs to be maintained. We've already reduced the account that pays for repairs and alterations by 20%. Do we really want to prohibit all repairs and all alterations at the White House, which is our house? I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas.
Well, I would say to the gentlewoman that there is ample money for maintenance involved in the White House. As I said, in count number 1519, there's $13 million available for electrical issues, for painting issues, for maintenance issues. I think what we're saying too, and I would be glad to work with the gentlewoman in conference report if she wants to be more specific, but the 3 projects that this administration requested actually totaled $2 million, $1.5 million for an electrical system, a computer system upgrades of $255,000, and plumbing system survey. This is a set of drawings for $250,000. I would submit to you that the American people are making some pretty tough choices, and that certainly the White House is a treasure of this country. But, Mr. Speaker, so are our children and our grandchildren a treasure. And if we don't start making some tough choices here, then we are not going to have a future for our children, and which it should be one of our more treasured assets. And so I would be glad to work with the gentlewoman in a conference report, but this amendment has merits because basically it says to the President, and I think the President would agree, you know what, if other American families are not making improvements to their house right now that aren't necessarily necessary this year, I don't think the President would want his either, without a reserve.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlewoman from Missouri.
May I make an inquiry, Mr. Chairman? Does Mr. Neugebauer have any other speakers? Then if he does not, let me say one thing, that this amendment doesn't specify the account being reduced if cuts are all repairs and alterations, and I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Serrano, my brother.
I thank you for the time. I recognize that you do not support the amendment, but some folks still cannot help themselves. This is not about the White House. It's about who lives in the White House. First, there was an amendment to cut his staff. Then there was an amendment that was taken away about not allowing him a teleprompter. And now there's an amendment that says that you can't fix the leaks in the White House. You know, we have a plumbing system at the White House that hasn't been repaired since Harry Truman. That's a long, long time. So, yes, there are difficult times in this country, but when you have a house visited by many, many tourists throughout the year, you should be careful as to the wiring, about the kind of things that could happen with water, about the kind of things that could happen with safety. And after all, whether we like this president or not, this is the residential place and the office space for our president, for the next one and the ones to follow. I think this is a proper investment, and personally, I think it gets pretty petty when we don't even allow this president to have leaks fixed in the White House, and I yield back the time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from
Chairman, do I have
Missouri.
any time remaining?
The gentlewoman from Missouri has 1.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Texas has 1.5 minutes remaining.
I will yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Moran.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady. I won't take but 30 seconds. Just to mention the fact I've been around long enough to recall when money was requested for the Vice President's mansion when Dick Cheney was living there. That money was provided. This side didn't object when money was put into the White House when George Bush was the resident. This is kind of mean-spirited games. It's really beneath us. Let's not do this kind of stuff. I would yield back the time to the gentlelady from Missouri. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from Missouri.
I'll yield back my time and urge opposition to this amendment, as well-intentioned as it may be.
The gentlelady yields back, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I kind of resent the insinuation that my amendment is addressed to this president. It's not addressed to this president. It's addressed to this country. And by the way, I was over at the White House during the White House Christmas party. The White House looked like in pretty good shape, and I can attest that the plumbing was actually working as well. But what I would say, Mr. Chairman, is there's a lot of people that would want to come to this floor tonight and make excuses why we can't begin to cut spending in this country. And you know what? The American people are tired of our excuses. This is a good amendment. There's been a lot of good amendments. Yes, these are difficult choices, but you know what? These are the kind of choices that we're going to have to make if we're going to ensure that our American families have a future, that we get this economy back going, that we create jobs, and that we do not leave a legacy of debt for our children and our grandchildren. With that, Mr. Chairman, I urge passage of it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
All time having been yielded back, the question is now on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye, and those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is the gentleman from Texas. Gentleman from Texas requests a recorded vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate.
Number 13.
Amendment number 13, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Rooney of Florida.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 17, 2011, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rooney, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my amendment prohibits any funding in this bill to be used to implement, administer, or enforce the rule entitled Water Quality Standards for the State of Florida's Lakes and Flowing Waters. Like all Floridians, I want clean and safe water, but this debate is not over whether we want clean water for Florida. It is over how we reach that goal and at what cost. This EPA mandate, which singles out Florida, will drive up the cost of doing business, double water bills for all Floridian families, and destroy jobs. By some estimates, this would cost our states an estimated approximately $2 billion. At a time when we should be attracting new companies in Florida, we cannot afford new regulations which will drive businesses out of our state and destroy jobs. Our unemployment rate is over 12% and at 15% in some parts of my district. New costly regulations is not going to improve those numbers. The EPA has repeatedly refused to allow third-party review of science behind the proposed mandate, and they have failed to complete an economic analysis. This regulation is not grounded in science. All Florida should not have to serve as a guinea pig in this radical experiment. That's right, Mr. Chairman. Florida is the first state being required to comply with this Washington, D.C. mandate, and according to a recent New York Times article, an EPA official said they have no plans to implement the regulations in any other state. So I ask you, how is that fair? But during the upcoming months, I'll be working with our Agricultural Commissioner and former colleague here, Adam Putnam, who wrote a letter recently, which I have here to be entered in the record, that says that this will impact 14,000 jobs in Florida. I'll also be willing to work with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and other concerned state and federal agencies to develop a plan that can be agreed upon by all parties. We cannot allow an unaccountable EPA to act dictatorial in this issue that affects every Floridian. Until the EPA is willing to consider Florida's unique needs and economy, this regulation must not go into effect. A recent poll shows that 68% of Floridians do not want this Washington, D.C. mandate. Dozens of Florida job creators and associations, as well as 60 national companies, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the American Farm Bureau, have sent letters to Congress to oppose this mandate. Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I reserve.
The gentleman's request will be covered under general leave. The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim the time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this amendment is the equivalent of sticking your head in the sand. I use that analogy because we're talking about Florida, hoping that a growing problem somehow will miraculously go away. Back in 2009, a consent decree was reached in federal court between EPA and numerous federal environmental groups to set numeric limits for nutrients in the state's lakes, rivers, and streams. Such numeric standards are the only way to make progress correcting ecological problems. The need for the standards contained in this consent decree was demonstrated repeatedly by Florida's Department of Environmental Protection. They pointed out that 1,000 miles of the state's rivers and streams, 350,000 acres of Florida's lakes, and 900 square miles of its estuaries were contaminated by nutrient pollution from sewage discharges and fertilizer and manure runoff. But this amendment would block these standards from being used. I fail to understand how the supporters of this amendment think that it's okay for folks to dump manure, fertilizer, and sewage into lakes and rivers without regard to the health of these waters or to the health of the people who depend upon these waters. This water quality rule was published last November, but the regulations don't go into effect until March of next year. The major activity by EPA that this amendment would prevent is an education effort to help the community's businesses and the public meet these new standards. The amendment also would block EPA from improving the regulations to meet the legitimate concerns of the public. That's what EPA is trying to do, reach out, get their ideas. There's a good question as to how much longer tourists will keep flocking to Florida if its lakes, streams, and rivers are in a death spiral flushed with the water quality of cesspools. I'll reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I continue to reserve.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman from Florida continues to reserve. The
Mr.
gentleman
Chairman,
from Virginia.
may I inquire how much time we have left?
The gentleman from Virginia has 3 minutes. The gentleman from Florida
How much time
has 2.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Washington. The gentleman from Virginia has the right to close. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would yield the entire 3 minutes to the very distinguished lady from Florida. Would the ranking member like to speak on this?
No,
So I would yield at this point the entire remaining 3 minutes to the very distinguished lady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman-Schultz.
The gentleman from Virginia yields the remaining time to the gentlewoman from Florida, and the gentlewoman is recognized.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to Amendment 13, which would defund Florida's new clean water rules. This amendment will harm Florida's economy and threaten the natural ecosystems on which we rely. This past November, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency approved a final regulation setting new water quality standards for Florida's lakes and streams. This clean water rule is desperately needed to address the nutrient pollution contaminating more than 1,000 miles of state rivers and streams, 350,000 acres of lakes, and 900 square miles of estuaries. Potential tourists to Florida often envision images of pristine beaches, beautiful waterways, and vibrant coastal ecosystems with great fishing and recreational opportunities. That is why so many people flock to our state. Florida's waterways, beaches, and coastal ecosystems are critical parts of the economic engine that drives Florida's $65 billion a year tourism industry. But without the new clean water standard, this could all evaporate. Already, algae outbreaks plague many of our lakes and rivers, depleting oxygen levels and suffocating living organisms. Nutrient pollution results in massive fish kills, waterways clogged with toxic green slime, beach closures, and reduced waterfront property values. We need these new clean water standards because the current standard for determining when someone is polluting is vague and therefore unenforceable. Waiting till a waterway is choked with sewage, fertilizer, or manure is simply no way to manage our waters. For over 10 years, the state of Florida labored to produce a clean water rule, but never quite got there. In the absence of state action, EPA had to act to protect Florida's waters. EPA produced a rule built on years of data collected by the state and based on the best science available. The Clean Water Rule is also the product of tens of thousands of public comments, numerous public meetings and workshops, and years of consultations between the state of Florida's Department of Environmental Protection and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. While EPA took over finalizing new standards, they did not take a my way or highway approach. They listened to Florida's citizens and regulated entities, made many adjustments, and included plenty of flexibility. To begin with, the final nutrient standards are comparable to the state's own draft standards. In some areas, they are more stringent, but in
The committee will be in order. Please take your conversations off the floor.
Mr. Chairman,
The gentlewoman,
if you would also ensure that the time hasn't continued.
yes.
Thank you very
The
much.
gentlewoman will continue.
Thank you. To begin with, the final nutrient standards are comparable to the state's own draft standards. In some areas, they are more stringent, but in other areas, they are less stringent. The major difference between the state and federal rule is that the EPA actually finalized it, rather than continuing the foot-dragging. And as a practical matter, all this amendment will really do is hurt the very stakeholders its proponents say they want to help. EPA built in a 15-month delayed implementation to allow it to provide technical assistance to stakeholders and ensure compliance is achieved in the most efficient, cost-effective way possible. EPA is using this time to hold workshops, seminars, and other meetings with regulated entities to achieve this end. But with this amendment, that all goes away. These regulated entities will still have to comply with the law, but now they'll be on their own. Perhaps even worse for the regulated entities, this amendment will prevent state water managers from utilizing the flexibilities of the rule. It would prevent the EPA from working with the state to develop and implement a process to review and approve site-specific alternative criteria proposed by regulated entities. This makes no sense. This rule provides flexibility to regulated entities and to the state. If the amendment passes, it would be devastating to Florida's economy.
The gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida yields back. All time is expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye, and those opposed no.
No!
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
The gentleman has asked for a recorded vote pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 8, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Stearns of Florida.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 17, 2011, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield myself such time as they may consume. My amendment, my colleagues, is simply to say that the United Nations is a very valuable building, and the renovations that are occurring right now are necessary.
Suspend. The gentleman is correct. The House, the committee is not in order. Ask all members to take your conversations to the cloakroom. The gentleman deserves to be heard on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr.
The
Chairman.
gentleman may continue.
Now, the renovations that are occurring on the UN are ultimately necessary, but the cost that is occurring is not. There's a huge overrun. I want to be clear that the opposition I have with this amendment is not to obstruct the UN from making a safe environment for the workers and the visitors that come there, but to encourage reform and use best business practices, considering the taxpayers are funding about a quarter of the amount of money they're spending for renovations. You know, we had a hearing here in Congress looking at what it would cost to build and renovate the United Nations. And they presented a figure. Well, Donald Trump, who's built a lot of hotels, a lot of apartment houses, came in and he said, I could do the same thing for half the money. That was half the money back when he offered that. So he said using better business practices, he could do it for a lot less money. So I believe, my colleagues, that the UN has had a history of wasting money. Let me give you one example. In 2003, the Secretary General's bulletin, he banned all smoking in the UN. Well, the UN spent $130,000 on a ventilation system to accommodate smokers in the cafeteria. Well, I'm not clear why they did that. The architect was starting to get into so much problem, they terminated him. By so doing, they paid him $44 million after the termination. So these are the kinds of things that I'm worrying about, and I think the UN auditors have expressed the same concern that I have in the whole process of procurement and contract management on this particular building. The GAO expressed their concern regarding the UN's weakness in existing internal oversight and procurement. So all I'm asking simply is, in this time of economy, we should hold off continuing to renovate the UN until we practice best business practices and we make sure that they're not continuing to have overruns, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. For what purposes does the gentlewoman from New York rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise against the Stearns Amendment because it would exacerbate security vulnerabilities at the United Nations headquarters in New York City. The United Nations Capital Master Plan addresses a number of serious life safety and security concerns to staff, diplomats, and visitors. The UN receives approximately 5,000 accredited delegates annually from around the world, 300,000 tourists, about 40% of whom are Americans. Almost 4,300 people work at the UN headquarters complex, including 1,280 Americans. The UN headquarters complex, the majority of which is 55 years old, is not compliant with New York City building and life safety codes or modern security requirements. The major building systems are inefficient, beyond their useful life, increasingly difficult to maintain and repair. For example, the life safety systems are a great concern, including inadequate sprinkler and alarm systems and the lack of an automatic shutdown of ventilation systems in the event of a fire. Hazardous materials such as asbestos are still present in the facilities. Providing the UN with safe and functional headquarters facilities will enable the organization to operate more effectively, is what we all want, and I yield back the balance.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from Florida.
How much time, Mr. Chairman, do I have remaining?
The gentleman from Florida has 3 minutes remaining.
Okay. Let me just mention a little thing more about my amendment. Basically, as I've told my colleagues, that this is a cost overrun on renovations in the UN, and more importantly, that with this huge economic downturn we've had, I think we need to go back and look at the procurement. I want to say something that's different from the UN amendment. I had an amendment 429 dealing with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. This amendment was ruled out of order, and it was because the amendment basically did not specify the individuals whose defense by the Internal Revenue, by the United States taxpayers, would be deleted. To put it in perspective, the amendment I had was saying that people like Franklin Raines, who was the CEO of Fannie Mae, and these other executives, while they were hiding huge amounts of debt, were collecting huge bonuses, including the board of directors of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. At the same time, the Inspector General found that these people were hiding this debt, and now taxpayers had to bail them out. But the ironic thing and the tragic thing is that taxpayers have to pay the salaries, have to pay the lawyers to defend all these people that actually were hiding the debt. So my amendment basically is saying that we should stop paying, taxpayers should stop paying the legal fees for these executives that were hiding the debt. But understanding that this is out of order, I'm not going to offer this amendment. We'll look for another opportunity. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a
Gentleman from Florida. Gentleman from Florida asks for a recorded vote pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in the congressional record on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 414 by Mr. Bishop of New York. Amendment 519 by Mr. Campbell of California. Amendment 246 by Mr. Brown of Georgia. Amendment 263 by Mr. Brown of Georgia. Amendment 526 by Mr. Wu of Oregon. Amendment 27 by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts. Amendment 409 by Mr. Price of Georgia. Amendment 296 by Mr. McClintock of California. Amendment number 99 by Mr. McDermott of Washington. Amendment 177 by Mr. Herger of California. Amendment 323 by Mr. Blumenauer of Oregon. Amendment 566 by Mr. Bourne of Oklahoma. Amendment 146 by Mr. Forbes of Virginia. Amendment 333 by Ms. Captor of Ohio. Amendment 46 by Mr. Paulus of Colorado. Amendment 498 by Mr. Johnson of Ohio. Amendment 467 by Mr. Goodlatte of Virginia, Amendment number 79 by Mr. Gardner of Colorado, Amendment 151 by Mr. Nagelbauer of Texas, Amendment number 13 by Mr. Rooney of Florida, Amendment number 8 by Mr. Stearns of Florida. The Chair will reduce to 2 minutes the time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 414, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bishop, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 414, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Bishop of New York.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
So House members continue to debate and then vote on some of the nearly 600 amendments to the continuing resolution to fund the federal government through September. This is the first of 16 votes in this block, an amendment that would prohibit the use of funds for the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility in Kansas. We spoke earlier with a Capitol Hill reporter who's been tracking the 359-page bill.
Sam Goldfarb of Congressional Quarterly joins us to talk about debate in the House on the funding bill for the federal government. When do you think we'll see a final vote?
Final vote will probably happen tomorrow. They're expecting to go to about 2 a.m. tomorrow and then take a break, come back in the morning, and just trying to finish it tomorrow. People obviously want to know exactly when tomorrow, but it could happen in the morning, it could happen in the afternoon, and they just want to get it done tomorrow.
Now, which of the amendments are getting the most attention?
A lot of the amendments that are getting the most attention have already been passed, have already been considered. There was one offered by Congressman Danny Rehberg of Montana that would cut off funding for President Obama's health care overhaul, and that did pass, and that was a big victory for House Republicans. There was another amendment that was really one of the biggest surprises, and it cut off funding for or cut out a program that funded the F-35 alternative engine for that fighter engine, and that was a victory for the Obama administration, which has been really pushing to cut off that funding. They think that that program is too expensive, but it's been supported for years in the House and the Senate, and so this was a big surprise. It's not clear, though, whether in the Senate they'll support that move.
How is the bill changed during this whole amendment process?
As I was saying, those are two of the biggest amendments, but generally there's just been dozens of amendments that have added to the overall spending cut. Compared to President Obama's fiscal 2011 budget request, the underlying legislation cut spending by about $100 billion, and each of these amendments generally just add a few $1 million to that overall total. So the spending cut is just generally getting bigger and more to the liking of House Republicans.
A number of amendments on Planned Parenthood funding, net neutrality, EPA on smog and global warming. What have you heard about those?
A lot of those have passed already. Planned Parenthood, that amendment by Congressman Mike Pence passed earlier today, largely party line vote. So that was a victory for Republicans who really don't, who feel that Planned Parenthood, provides abortions, and even today, the government isn't supposed to provide any funding for abortions, but Republicans are generally skeptical of Planned Parenthood, and this was important to them. But that's one of those amendments that, though it was a symbolic victory for the House Republicans, it's probably not going to be in any final bill that is signed by President Obama.
If they don't pass the bill, how likely is a government shutdown?
Well, the House is going to pass their bill. It's going to go to the Senate. And if the House and the Senate can't agree to a bill, then that results in a government shutdown. And that would be a major development that hasn't happened since the mid-1990s. And generally, people have assumed that it wouldn't happen, but in recent days, the chances have seemingly gone up. Speaker John Boehner said that he wouldn't accept any bill that doesn't cut spending, and that is very different from what Senate Democrats want. They want to freeze spending, but they don't want to make any cuts.
Well, what other options are there besides just a full-out shutdown?
Even despite what Speaker Boehner said, I think a lot of people still expect a short-term bill just to keep the government running just for a few weeks perhaps, so that to give the House and Senate more time, just a little bit more time to reach an agreement, because there's not a lot of time left before the current spending law expires on March 4th. If they can't reach agreement by then the government would shut down. So people really, I think, still expect some sort of short-term compromise just so they can reach, have more time to reach an agreement on a longer-term bill.
Sam Goldfarb of Congressional Quarterly. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
The House of Representatives continuing work tonight on the continuing resolution to fund government operations through September. This is the first of 21 votes on a series of amendments. More votes expected throughout the evening. House Democratic leaders spoke to reporters today about the 2011 spending bill offered by the Republicans.
Good afternoon. Oh, wow. Good afternoon. As we gather here this afternoon, we are in the 6th week of the new Republican majority, and we have yet to see congressional Republicans address the country's #1 priority. They have not put forth one jobs bill to create one job. And Democrats and the American people have been repeating a simple refrain: show us the jobs. Now the GOP is not just ignoring jobs, they're cutting them. Today we continue to debate a Republican spending bill that cuts jobs, weakens the middle class, and does not reduce the deficit. The bill will destroy 800,000 American jobs, according to the Economic Policy Institute. It will increase class sizes and take teachers out of the classroom. Can you imagine? What does this mean to people across the country? It means the class size in your school the number may be increased. My own granddaughter told me that was not a good idea when she was 11 years old. Now she's 12 and she still doesn't think it's a good idea. It will jeopardize homeless veterans, make our communities less secure, threaten America's innovation, and all the Republicans can say about this: loss of jobs, larger class size, problems for America's homeless vets, and the rest. So be it. From the beginning, Democrats have said we will measure every proposal by 3 tests. Does it create jobs? Does it reduce the deficit? Does it strengthen the middle class? This continuing resolution fails on all 3 scores. And it's long past the time when we must work together to create American jobs. Job creation and American growth must be our top priority. Instead, in recent days, we've heard talk of a government shutdown. Let's remove all doubt. We all have a responsibility to make sure that there is no government shutdown. The last thing that American people need is for congressional Republicans or Democrats to draw a line in the sand that hinders keeping the government open. Closing our government would mean our men and women in uniform wouldn't receive their paychecks, and veterans would lose critical benefits. Seniors wouldn't receive their Social Security checks, and essential functions from food safety inspection to airport security could come to a halt. When President Bush was in office and I was Speaker, we met with then Minority Leader Boehner and the representatives of the administration to solve critical issues facing our nation, negotiating a stimulus package a couple of years ago, now almost 3, to help America's middle class, and a financial package to save the economy. We're on the brink of a financial disaster. We worked with the administration and with Mr. Boehner to halt that steep fall that our financial institutions was about to take. We didn't like having to do that. It wasn't our Democrats didn't create the problem. It was President Bush's solution. The Republicans didn't want to vote for it. We cooperated with President Bush. So the idea of cooperation in a bipartisan way to do the right thing for our country is one that we have to keep uppermost in our mind. As we see this flood of amendments of every idea anybody could ever think of, it's interesting. But it's not what needs to happen. What needs to happen to govern is to choose, President Kennedy told us. We must establish priorities. It's not everything you can think of. It's what must be, those things that must be done for the American people. And their top priority is the creation of jobs. We must have a continuing resolution that does just that. Make it a priority for job creation, deficit reduction, and strengthening the middle class. And now I'm pleased to yield to the distinguished Democratic whip, Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you very much, Madam Leader. We have, as the Speaker indicated, been here for 2 months. We've been here for 2 months, and we have not taken a single action to create jobs in America. In fact, we've done 2 major things that will undermine, in my view, jobs in America. First of all, we adopted a rules package. What did that rules package provide for? An additional $5 trillion in deficits. We hear a lot about cutting spending, but the rules package provides for the cutting of revenues by $5 trillion without any way to pay for it. Therefore, even if the Republicans accomplished what they say they want to accomplish, a $100 billion cut in spending, and we believe there needs to be a cut in spending, and not only that, the President of the United States has offered a budget which cuts over $1 trillion over the next 10 years in spending. The fact is that the Republicans have now offered a continuing resolution which puts us in a hole. We've said we want to out-educate, out-innovate, and out-invest and build our competitors in the global marketplace. In terms of out-educating, the Republicans have offered a substantial cut in education. They've made it tougher for young people to go to college, for families to be able to afford for their kids to go to college, for 200,000 teachers to be kept on teaching our children in America. They have cut 20,000 researchers from the National Science Foundation, undermined our ability to innovate and compete in the global marketplace. And as Tom Donahue, the President of the United States Chamber of Commerce, has observed, they have cut investment in infrastructure, which would have created tens of thousands of jobs. So that, unlike the Democrats who came into office to stabilize and to build and to create jobs, the Republicans who went through the same election we did and heard America's cry for jobs and growth in the economy, their response has been simply political. We should not be surprised. I want all of you to ask yourselves, what was the long-term impact of the contract with America? I think you'll be hard-pressed to say that the bills that were focused on in 1995 made a difference in America. And very frankly, in this first 2 months, I think you'd be hard-pressed to say that we have made a difference for America. That's unfortunate. We want to work with our Republican colleagues, and I mean that sincerely. I've had the opportunity during these first 2 months to sit down for significant periods of time with Mr. Cantor, the Majority Leader, with Mr. McCarthy, the Republican whip, with Mr. Camp, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And I've had an opportunity also to have a brief discussion with Mr. Hensling, the chairman of their conference. And I've told all of them, we want to work together. We want to reach across to create common cause for solutions to America's challenges. I'm hopeful that we can do that. One way that America told us very loudly in 1995 is not the way to do it, is to shut down government. And I'm going to work very hard, as the leader said, with all of my Democratic colleagues and hopefully my Republican colleagues to make sure that we do not shut down our government. We don't want to do that. We hope our Republican colleagues don't want to do that. But if the posture that they take is no way, our way or no way, then it is possible that will happen. But it will not happen if we work together, which is what we want to do. We saw the negative consequences of that in 1995. Our Republican colleagues thought it would be politically advantageous. Hopefully they do not repeat that mistake again. And now I yield to the Assistant Leader, Mr. Jim Clyburn of South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Whip. Madam Leader, I think that all of us remember during our lame duck session last, 3 months ago, we heard some chanting from the other side, where are the jobs? For the last 6 weeks, it's been anything but jobs. Rolling back women's rights, repealing consumer protections, making it harder for students to go to school, balancing the budget on the backs of working families, veterans, and young people. And now, they are putting Social Security payments and services at risk. The Social Security Administration, responsible for processing benefit applications, issuing checks to recipients, and sending new Social Security cards to children, warned in a letter to its employees on Thursday that it may have to furlough workers if the proposed cuts to this budget are enacted into law. In the GOP's so be it spending bill, Republicans have proposed cutting Social Security administrative funding by more than 9%, from $11.8 billion in 2010 to $10.7 billion this year. In addition, the Republican proposal provides for $1.7 billion less than Social Security needs to keep pace with inflation and its rising workloads. These are the wrong priorities. Democrats have said we will measure every effort by whether it creates jobs, strengthens the middle class, and reduces the deficit. Democrats agree with President Obama that we must out-innovate, out-educate, and outbuild the rest of the world. We believe we can live within our means and create jobs, invest in our future, and reduce the deficit, starting with an aggressive attack on waste, fraud, and abuse. I hope that when we get back from this break, that we can work together on behalf of the American people to move our country forward. With that,
thank you very much, Mr. Leader. And as I said to Mr. Hoyer, it's the first time I've heard him make some remarks without saying "Make it in America." I know he's going to catch up with that during the Q&A, because that's indeed what we must do. We must make it in America so the American people will make it in America. And this week we observed the 2-year anniversary of the recovery package. As Mr. Clyburn was speaking, and they were talking about the Republicans and their lack of job initiatives, that
1 week and 1 day after the President's inaugural address, the House of Representatives passed the recovery package, which created or saved 3.5 million jobs. President Obama and the House Democrats and the congressional Democrats were job creators from day one. It's not enough. Much more needs to be done. That's why we want to see some initiatives on the part of our Republican friends. I do want to just mention, before we go into the questions and answers, that, again, as we gather here in Wisconsin right now, we are watching an extraordinary show of democracy in action. Wisconsin's workers, teachers, and public servants must have a seat at the table to fight for good wages and a safe workplace. I stand in solidarity with the Wisconsin workers fighting for their rights, especially commend all the students and young people leading the charge again for fairness and for opportunity in their community. With that, we'll be pleased to take any questions.
Madam Leader, good afternoon. 1995, we had a large freshman Republican class came into office. 11 months later, the government shut down on multiple occasions through early 1996. Here we have a large conservative freshman Republican class. Do you get the sense that this class, they don't understand what happened in 1995? Do you see parallels here because they are so steeled in their positions when it comes to cutting back, the budget compared to what happened?
We were all here at that time, so I'm sure we'll all have something to say about that. But I don't want to characterize what their understanding is of the issues. I just think it's important for all of us to recognize that we cannot allow the government to shut down. And again, it's important for everyone to say what they would like to see happen, but they must establish priorities as we go forward. And none of us, the country cannot afford the luxury of a political standoff. It's something that you can't say, so be it, when it comes to the well-being of the American people. So talking about what happened in the past, it may be a nice academic
on this vote,
exercise.
On this vote, the yeas are 156, the nays 269. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on amendment number 514, printed in the congressional record offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Campbell, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 519, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Campbell of California.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
$19 more votes left in this voting block. This is an amendment by California Republican John Campbell. It would reduce funding by 3.5% to the Defense and Homeland Security Departments. This just in, a story from CQ. Intra-party divisions spilled onto the House floor today as a minority of Republicans joined Democrats in defeating a conservative effort to make deeper cuts in government spending. The underlying measure would cut $61 billion in spending for the rest of fiscal 2011, but a group of conservative Republicans, many of them freshmen, sought to make deeper cuts with an amendment sponsored by Ohio Republican Jim Jordan, chairman of the Conservative Republican Study Committee. The amendment was rejected. It would have cut an additional $22 billion in spending.
On this vote, the yeas are 68, the nays are 357. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business request for a recorded vote on amendment number 246, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, on which further proceedings will postpone, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 246, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This vote.
The House working for a fourth day on the continuing resolution to fund the federal government through September. Now, once passed, the measure will be sent to the Senate, which will take it up when they return from recess on Monday, February 28th. Members continue to debate and then vote on some of the nearly 600 amendments tied to this 359-page measure.
Vote. The yeas are 74, the nays 348. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business request for a recorded vote on amendment number 263, printed in congressional record, offered by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, on which further proceedings will postpone, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 263, printed in the congressional record, Brown of Georgia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
"17 votes after this one. This is another amendment sponsored by Georgia Republican Paul Brown. It would bar the use of funds that pay dues to the United Nations. Some key amendments that have already been passed include blocking the FCC from implementing net neutrality regulation, banning federal funds to Planned Parenthood, and other amendments aimed to defund the national health care law.
On this vote, the yeas are 177, the nays are 243. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business request for recorded vote on amendment number 526, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Wu, on which further proceedings were postponed, and in which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 526.